I am extremely happy that a high-level panel discussion is being organized on food security and biodiversity. Biodiversity is the feedstock for sustainable food security, because without biodiversity, we will not be able to meet the challenges of the future, particularly in relation to climate change. And also today it is clear that all the additional food which we have to produce for the growing population and also for the growing consumption by the poor will have to come not only from existing land but less land than we have today. Land is a shrinking resource for agriculture, so also the per capita availability of irrigation water is also going down. Under these circumstances, how do you ensure that we do not lose the existing biodiversity, because the loss of every gene and species limits our options for the future, particularly in the context of the current ability to move genes across sexual barriers through recombinant DNA technology. What we have to do, in my view, is to ensure, first, there's a much greater biodiversity literacy among farm women and men in villages. In other words, the correlation, the relationship between biodiversity and their own livelihood security will have to be brought out. Secondly, there has to be public policies which can help farmers to conserve biodiversity. In other words, what I call the conservation, cultivation, consumption and commerce chain must be an integrated chain. In India, one of the important public policy decisions taken recently is in the National Food Security Bill. The National Food Security Bill of India is probably the largest social protection measure against hunger ever undertaken in human history, because it provides practically no-cost food to over 800 million children, women and men. It's a legal right. It's not a patronage, not a political patronage, but a legal right to food. Right to food with homegrown food by a country which was leading what was called ship-to-mouth existence is a wonderful example of the power of biodiversity. All these changes came from the new strains of wheat, rice, maize, sorghum, millet, and a whole series of other millets. Fortunately, our food security bill has provided for the enlargement of the food basket. No longer it is just wheat and rice, but a whole series of orphan crops, or nutri-cereals as we call them, climate-smart nutri-cereals like those belonging to panicum, paspalum, setaria, and a whole series, leucine, coracana. All of them can now be bought at a very low price. A market has been created. The market is the most important. Assured and remunerative marketing is the greatest incentive to farmers to conserve biodiversity. Otherwise, they can't continue to conserve biodiversity at personal cost for public good. This is why in India we have also introduced what we call the Genome Savior Award for the farm women and men who are conserving biodiversity of food crops, agro-biodiversity. They are being recognized through the Genome Savior Award. So we need recognition and reward for farm families who are conserving biodiversity. Secondly, we need public policy by which there is a market value for underutilized crops, neglected crops, vanishing crops. Vanishing crops and dying wisdom can be preserved only through appropriate market opportunity. I hope the Cambridge seminar on the whole relationship between food security and biodiversity will throw new light, and will also show to policy makers how to multiply good examples. Food security does not mean only the availability of grains in the market. There must be access to it, purchasing power, and above all the ability to absorb it. In other words, the clean drinking water, sanitation, primary health care, nutritional literacy, all of them important, both food and non-food factors. And above all, biodiversity is fundamental. The conservation of biodiversity is fundamental. Many of them have provided transformational genes, like the DG-Ugin dwarfing gene in the case of rice, the Norin dwarfing genes in wheat. They are all transformational genes which have transformed agriculture, transformed the scenario of food security. As I said earlier, a country like India, which had been practically written off by experts 50 years ago as a country which cannot feed itself, today has the only one country which has the right to food as a legal right for over 800 million people, women, children and men. I hope the Cambridge seminar will underline the importance of the relationship between biodiversity and also food security, and also provide to policy makers guidelines on how we can create an economic stake in conservation, an economic stake in the conservation of biodiversity, in the conservation of orphan crops, in the conservation of vanishing wisdom. And I am extremely grateful to the organizers of the Cambridge meeting, Dr. Derek Eaton and his colleagues, for asking me to record this message. I am sorry I am not there personally to take part in this most important meeting, but I value the opportunity to share a few thoughts, and I wish this Cambridge meeting much success.